career years in Swaziland. And as you've already mentioned, now I work here in Washington, D.C., and working with women entrepreneurs around the world. We're talking to someone about a program that we're running at the moment, where we've got about 45 women from around the world who we're in our 7th cohort, and I think we've reached about 78 countries with that particular program. So it's exciting work. My career path has sort of led me into working in economic empowerment. You asked about my career journey. I actually had to write it on a scrap of paper so I remember all the pieces, because it's really, really messy. And I like to share the story actually just because I think that people, when they leave school, are often under pressure from their families to pursue a particular career path. Like I know in India, for young women, they're usually expected to become a lawyer or a doctor, and so it's either that or nothing, you know. So I know also from my school days that we were expected to choose one career, and that would be your career for life. And usually you would land up working in the same organization for your entire life. And look how different life is now. So I'll share a little bit about that journey. When I left school, I didn't actually know what I wanted to do, and my parents sent me for an aptitude test, and it came back saying I should study quantities or architecture or occupational health or law. I used to doodle in my school books. My dad said, well, that's really easy. Why don't you go and do architecture? And that's literally how I decided to pursue my first career journey. And I did a 3-year diploma course in architecture and landed up doing work in Swaziland, South Africa, and in London, and loved my work. I was doing drawings of houses, multi-story apartment blocks, all sorts of stuff, and then sort of doing everything from the sketch drawings to supervising the construction, working with engineers and quantity surveyors, all the way through to handing over the keys to the client at the end of the project. And I loved that project-based kind of work where you had a beginning and an end, and then you started the next one. Loved that. Then I've also done a lot of sport in my life in Southern Africa. I think because of the climate, everyone is kind of outdoors and everything. And at the age of 30, or around that time, I had a boyfriend who was into water skiing, and he taught me to ski really well. And I had this crazy idea at 30 that I actually wanted to go and work at Club Med as a water skiing instructor. So I created this ridiculous resume. It was like a 20-page document where I put in photographs of all the sporting activities I'd done, all the way from school, all the way through to there. And it included theater, sailing, all sorts of stuff. And I thought, you know, I know they like people who are very active and are very people-pleasing or work with a lot of people. So I sent off this crazy resume, and I actually got the job without an interview, which was amazing. So my first village that I went to was in Mauritius, and I spent a year working there and absolutely loved it. It's a completely different kind of lifestyle, and you work for 6 months, 7 days a week. Really liked it, but when I came sort of towards the end of my second 6-month season, we had a really awful boss, a chef de village, and he was a really pretty toxic piece of work. And I decided I actually couldn't work there anymore. I had no respect for him, and so I decided to go home and wait for my next village. And went home, and nothing came, and nothing came. So I went actually back into my old architectural job, and I bought a car. I got my first dog, and really got stuck back into architecture. And then Club Med phoned and said, well, actually, we've got you your next 2 villages, which were 2 that I wanted to work at. And I said to them, look, I bought a dog, so I can't, you know, I can sell the car, but I can't leave the dog behind. So I stayed in architecture. And eventually the architectural world in Swaziland downsized quite a lot. And I was downsized out of my job. And at that time, I had started doing all the admin and human resources in the architectural practice. So my boss found me my next job in a microfinance institute. And I ended up doing all the admin and HR for this microfinance institute, 3 years. It was a USAID project. And at the end of those 3 years, it went into liquidation. So once again, I was without a job. And I got headhunted to run an industrial catering company in Swaziland. So basically supervising teams who are managing kitchens in hospitals, in country clubs, in schools. And they had recruited me because of my organizational skills. And I realized about 6 months into this job that I was way out of my depth, because in industrial catering, the profit margins are so small. And I thought, I don't know enough to even recognize if there's any theft going on, I'm not going to be able to see it until it's too late. So I actually resigned. I thought, I can't do this. And at that time, I'd also done a lot of amateur theater in Swaziland, and I had produced the Rocky Horror Show. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's a pretty big musical production, and I had a large cast and a large stage crew. And when I left the industrial catering company, I bumped into a woman who was in the cast of that theater production, and she said to me, "Why don't you come and help me run my handcraft business? You know, working with artisans in Swaziland." And I thought, okay, I guess I could do that for a year or two, help her out. And at this time, I was in my late 30s, and I actually loved the work. It was the first time in my life I was doing a job where my daily input was impacting the lives of other people. Before that, all my jobs were just like to earn a salary so I could do fun things on the weekend. But when I joined this business, my partner, Jenny, had grown the business to the point where she was working with 600 rural women in Swaziland and exporting beautiful products around the world. Things like placemats, it was all tableware and table accessories. And I loved the work. And within a year, we formalized the business. I became a partner, a shareholder in the business. And then it was a really great experience. I was the one in the workshop helping everything sort of run very efficiently. And Jenny was the one out in the mountains doing all the design. About 4 years into that business relationship, Jenny passed away really very suddenly from leukemia within about 6 weeks of being diagnosed. And it was a real shock to me and to everyone else. At that stage, we'd grown the business to where we were working with about 730 women. And if you know anything about Swaziland, you may know that it still has the highest HIV infection rate in the world. And we knew that each of the women artisans that we were working with was supporting between 7 and 8 dependents. So this business that we were running was supporting about 6,000 rural Swazi people. And so when Jenny died, I thought, well, I guess I'm stuck here. I had thought I'd stay in a couple more years and then move on. So I brought in a business partner and then a second business partner because we were growing so much. And at that time, we also got to know the International Finance Corporation here in Washington, D.C. And they loved this social enterprise model that we had, you know, providing income generation to rural communities. So they started bringing me to DC to showcase this business, to speak at the World Bank, etc., tell them the whole mechanism of it. And we'd always wanted to do more work with the community in terms of social upliftment. So kept growing the business. And then I got to a point when I felt like I had reached my glass ceiling in the business. I didn't have anything new to contribute. And the business was also at a point where we could only sustain 2 people in management, and we were 3. And I thought to myself, you know, of the 3 of us, who's the one who's already contributed the most? And it was me. And I was thinking, who are the others who still have a lot more to add? And of course, it was the other 2 women. So I decided to step away from the business and leave it in the hands of these 2 younger women who had great new ideas. And when I announced this to the IFC, they freaked out. They said, no, you can't go. You're the boss of this business. You can't possibly leave. And I already knew that Philippa, who had been working with me for a couple of years, was my successor. So I said to the IFC, no, I have to go. She's the one. She's ready. And they said, well, we're a little bit nervous because we've invested in you. We've given you a loan. We've given you a grant. We're worried we don't know her as well as we know you. So I said, I have to go. We cannot sustain this. And they said, okay, we'll make you a deal. We know that you want to start a foundation to work with those 730 women and to help them with things like HIV support, access to clean drinking water, etc. So we'll pay your salary for a year to launch a nonprofit, to do all of that stuff, and use that year to mentor Philippa. I said, of course, what a deal. So that's what I did. And for that year, I hardly had to spend any time mentoring Philippa. She was sorted, but it gave me that opportunity to get the foundation started. And the other part of my mandate was I needed to find my successor in the nonprofit as well. So in that year, started making connection with funding organizations and also identified the woman who was going to take over from me in the nonprofit. And I'm very happy to say that now, so I left in 2007, I think. So 12 years later, the Gone Rural business, the business itself, if you ever want to look it up online, it's called goneruralswazi.com. It is now on about the third managing director since I left. So we actually started this succession planning idea, and the nonprofit is also on about its third director who is running the foundation. So I love that culture of thinking of when is it maybe time that you've outgrown that organization, time to bring in new energy, to bring new ideas and fresh ideas. So at the end of that year of running the foundation, I had met the organization I work with now, Vital Voices, and the International Finance Corporation. They both asked me to do some consulting work in handcraft development. And I ended up working with the two of them and with an organization that some of you might be familiar with called TechnoServe. And what I was doing was in Swaziland, I was mentoring emerging handcraft businesses. And with the IFC and with Vital Voices, I developed a sort of like a business boot camp for women entrepreneurs who were at an export ready level. So I spent the next 4 years traveling around, basically training and bringing together a team of trainers to grow women in the handcraft sector. All of that funding came to an end at the same time from those three organizations. And a friend shared a job description of a position that was being advertised in Johannesburg, South Africa, for the program manager of the Coca-Cola Africa Foundation. And I thought, how cool. You know, I started this tiny little foundation in Swaziland. This is a foundation that takes care of the whole African continent. And I applied, thinking I wasn't going to get the job, and I got it. It was amazing. I kind of felt like my angels were with me, and they'd said, okay, we gave you that little one as a training ground. Now you can have this big one to work with. And I loved the work. So we were working in Africa in water, in education, and in health. And in health, it was particularly around malaria and HIV/AIDS. And I loved working with Coca-Cola. I loved the work, but I had another toxic boss. And after about a year, I realized I couldn't stay. There weren't any other opportunities within Coke at the time that suited my skill set. So I decided to leave. And I actually resigned without having a job to go to. It was just one of those, I don't know if you ever have those days where you wake up and you know the decision has to be made that day. It's as clear as anything. And I had always, with Vital Voices, the organization I work with now, when I was consulting with them, I always wanted to move to Washington, D.C. and to be based in D.C. doing more of the same work. So I resigned from Coke on the 31st of October of whatever year it was. And on the 1st of November, I got an email from the CEO of Vital Voices saying, what are you up to? And I said, well, I just resigned from my job yesterday. And she said, well, that's so cool because we have a position available here in DC. We think you're the person. Would you be interested in relocating? And my answer was, let me think about that. Yes. So I managed to get a visa and moved to DC in 2013. And initially, I ran a number of programs that were focused on economic empowerment, and then a couple that stretched across other sectors. We then restructured about 2 years ago. So all of the programs in my portfolio now are around economic empowerment and entrepreneurship with women around the world. And we look at particularly at social entrepreneurs and women who are addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the nutshell of the career. I think the things that I've learned along the way, as you've heard, I never planned this career path, but I've learned that it's really important to step out. If you're in a career that you feel is toxic, you need to move on. That's one thing. And I've also learned that sort of like the more I've tuned into what I enjoy doing, and that is in the service of others, the more opportunities will come. So going into the women's economic empowerment space, because I was doing work in the service of others, many opportunities came. One last lesson I want to share around the toxic environments. I'm older than 40. I'm not going to tell you how old, but it's a little bit more than 40. But from the age of 40, I started having mammograms, as you're supposed to do if you're a woman. And so I've had mammograms every year, and they've always been clear. And my next mammogram after I left Coca-Cola with that toxic boss, I knew that he was impacting on my health. And the mammogram after that came up with little white spots, and it was just before I was supposed to move to DC. And the people at the center said to me, look, don't panic, but as soon as you get to DC, go and see someone. And I eventually had a little lump removed, probably about that size, off my breast. And my boss, that boss at Coca-Cola's name was William. And I considered that surgery as being getting William off my chest. And kind of, I always think about situations like that, where if this is not serving you, you do need to move on, because your health and your livelihood, everything about you is more important than sticking with a job, particularly if it's not positive and is not serving you and bringing you value as much as you bring value to that organization. So let me stop there, because I've been talking for a while now.
That's really incredible. Thank you so much for what an amazing career journey, first of all. Like, and as you said, like, it's unplanned, and all of the fellows that are joining here, and maybe even including myself. You start when you're in university, you're thinking of a specific career path and things that you're really interested in, and that's what you envision yourself doing for 30, 40, 50 years. But you just never know what comes in your pathway, and sometimes it's for the good, and you find things that are truly things that you end up being passionate about and dedicating your life towards, that you just would have never thought about when you're sitting, and where all the fellows might be sitting now. So thank you so much for sharing that, and mental health and also physical health are really important to just your overall well-being, and making sure that comes as a priority before anything else. But it sounds like, throughout your career, there has always been that focus on women empowerment, even before joining Vital Voices. So working in the handcraft business, supporting women, and your work and focusing on the HIV business. And maybe that transitions into my second question around, how, when it comes to social entrepreneurship, the nice thing is there's a lot of unity and collaboration, as opposed to for-profit business where it's more about competition. Point when you were saying, in a lot of the jobs that you did, there was a lot of focus on just salary, but then with nonprofits, it's really about impacting the lives of people. In your work with Vital Voices, but even before, when it comes to women supporting women, are there specific things that people need to be doing to really focus on supporting women, especially in the social entrepreneurship side or in the social enterprises? Are there specific either ways of going about, starting social enterprises or enterprises to supporting women? Or is it similar to a normal business? And from your experience, how does it work?
That's a really interesting question. I think, I think deep at the root of social enterprise, it's all about what is the problem that you're solving. And I think many of the answers come from the people who are living inside that problem. So, for example, if I think about Gone Rural, we knew, I knew from every time I went out to go and work with our rural artisans that they had challenges like in Swaziland, the government doesn't give free education. So they had the issue of having to educate children. There was, in most of their communities, there was no running water, there was no electricity, that kind of thing. So when we started the foundation, I think my biggest piece was to really understand what those big challenges were, what were the solutions that that those communities already knew about, but could perhaps not address themselves because they didn't have the resources. And I have to say that I'm also one of those people. I was born in Swaziland. I consider myself to be a Swazi. But there have been a lot of international organizations who come into countries with developing economies, and they sometimes bring solutions which are completely the wrong solution. So, I mean, I don't know if this is an urban legend, but there was a story about an organization who donated 200 electric sewing machines into a community where there's no electricity. You know, how ridiculous is that? So, and that's a really simple example, but I do think it's about in social enterprise, really understanding who the target audience is and what's already there before you start bringing in new innovation. And often the people with the greatest innovative solutions are those people living in those communities already that might have that great idea that is going to change their world. So it would be understand the local context deeply in whatever it is you're doing. And then another interesting piece that I've learned a lot about here at Vital Voices and also in Swaziland was, you know, if you're working in a developing country, what are the cultural implications of your the work that you're doing? You know, by empowering someone, are you shifting some kind of culture? I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we were working with a woman artisan in Kenya from the Samburu, which is a very rural area with not much. So it's pretty far from anything, any great cities. And they were doing beadwork. And we took this woman that we were working with to the Santa Fe International Folk Art Market. And she sold all of her product. And she was working with women in her village. They were making the product. They'd created almost like a cooperative. And they were working, she had established a shelter for women running away from domestic violence. And situations like that. So all of these women were living at the shelter, making this beaded product to generate an income so that they could educate their kids. They eventually built a school. They built a community. And so when she did the sale at Santa Fe, the money she was bringing back was for all of those women who'd made that product. And what we had forgotten about was when she left her husband, she never got divorced from him. And I'm not even sure if in her culture she's allowed to get divorced from him. But she turned up, she went back home and she had probably about $10,000 worth of money with her, which was supposed to be distributed to all these women. And the estranged husband turned up on the doorstep and said, well, actually, because we're still married, that's my money. You know, and it ended up that her life was under threat. And for about 18 months, she had to live in Nairobi, which is like a 6-hour bus drive away from her home because her life was under threat from this particular situation. And it's something that I would never have thought of, that cultural implication of if you think you're doing something good in a community, is it actually good? There've also been the stories with things like water where, let's say you've got a community where the women walk for 2 hours every day to go and fetch water, and then they walk back. And then you drill a borehole or a well close to their village. Some of the women don't use the well because they like taking that 2 hours because it's their time to catch up with their girlfriends, to discuss anything that's going on. So there's always I always think about like, what's the other side of the story? If you're providing a solution, is it actually the right solution for everyone? Is it right for everyone in that community? Have you spoken to the local chiefs? You know, have you spoken to everyone all the way up the chain to make sure that there is buy-in from everybody? So that's one piece that I would say.
Amazing. Awesome. Yeah. And I know part of the Millennium Fellowship focuses on learning before serving and just understanding the community. And it's especially important if you're even not part of that community and you're, you know, trying to offer support, which, you know, is not necessarily bad, but also requires a lot of time and effort that, you know, you need to dedicate to be able to understand the actual problems that are facing the communities and the solutions that have been implemented or have not been implemented for reasons. So being able to do your due diligence before going into the community to offer your services or your support. A lot of our fellows are working on different projects, advancing the different sustainable development goals. And for my last question, and maybe even before asking it, I want to remind fellows that we're starting Q&A very shortly. So if you have any questions, feel free to type it down in the chat box. But for my last question for you, Zoe, is the Millennium Fellows are in the beginning of their social impact career. So what advice would you give the fellows that are working on advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, and perhaps particularly those that relate to economic empowerment and gender equality, or women empowerment as well?
I'm just trying to think if there's anything sort of tactical that I can suggest. You know, I'm really excited that we have the Sustainable Development Goals, that there are goals, and that they're, you know, as I read through them, there is a document, it's about a 20-page document, which goes through all the sub-bullets of all the things that are being measured in each of the SDGs. And I think there's a lot of stuff, you know, if we think about SDG 5, so it's about gender equality. If I think about that in a very simplistic way, it's about sort of women having equal rights. But if you dig deeper into that, it means different things in different parts of the world. So I would say, as if I was starting something new and wanted to look at the SDGs, I would have a really good deep read through to see what all of those different sub-bullets are, because it may also bring up new inspiration, new innovation, where you might find in one of them there's about 10 sub-bullets and everyone's addressing the top 5 and the bottom 5 aren't getting much attention, but that may be where there's room for innovation. So it's really that. One of the things that we're starting to do with the women entrepreneurs that we work with is we're suggesting that they also start talking about the SDGs on their websites, in everything, so that you're raising that conversation so that people understand what those collective goals are for us, for humanity, and for our planet, you know, because I think in many cases, if people think that they're in one particular area, like all of our women, of course, think of themselves as being in SDG 5. That's the one that I'm working in. We actually do a business competition every year called the We Empower UN SDG Challenge, where we invite women from around the world who are addressing the SDGs to enter this competition, and they can win a grant. And we ask them to write about which of the SDGs that they're addressing. And often, again, they just pick one or two. But as you look through, there are probably many more. And I think it's, if I was thinking sort of big picture, if I was establishing my own new social enterprise right now, and I had a broad idea of what it would be, I would probably also start building in all of those different pieces, all of the SDGs, to say, here's what I'm working on, because you're going to catch the eye of more people that way who will be interested and will want buy-in to what you're doing. So just really deeply understand them. And then maybe just also find out who are the greatest innovators in each of those spaces in the world right now, because there's some incredible innovation going on to address some of those challenges.
Great, thank you so much. The SDGs are interlinked more than we think. A lot of fellows might be working, and I know from at least some of the people I see in the room, but also from what we've been seeing the past few months, when you're working on, you know, for example, raising awareness about an issue, you're working on quality education, but maybe 2-3 other SDGs. And so really trying to learn more about them, but also figure out where the innovation is and how you can continue to develop your work. With that, I would love to open it up for Q&A. So for questions, as when I read your name, please, you'll be unmuted, so please introduce yourself, name, university, country, and ask your question. So I see a question from there. Bear, would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question? You're unmuted now.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks. This has been so rewarding and so so meaningful and really tangible. Like I had a lot of like I too have worked with toxic bosses before, and it just felt so interesting to hear someone who's like spun it into so much success and looked at it from a really optimistic lens of sort of where can I go to create more value, and what spaces can I open up here for other people to create value. I did really like that. My question was actually more specific, though, to utilizing technology in the developing world. And I like the example that you gave on sewing machines and no electricity, and you sort of spoke about how it wasn't really an appropriate or an effective use of technology to solve a problem. And often it can be the case in the developing world, but we also know the power of technology to create really scalable and effective solutions to problems. So my question, I guess, is what experience or what examples or advice do you have on how to use technology within the developing world to scale social impact, both effectively and appropriately?
It's a great question. So I have to admit, I'm not a huge technology buff, but as I was reading your question in the chat box, it made me think of the woman who actually won our We Empower competition this year. And her name is Leah Lizarondo. And she has a social enterprise, which is called, I think it's called 412 Food Rescue. I might have the number wrong, but it's basically an app, a phone app, where, and it's almost like Uber, for an Uber app for restaurants and businesses that have surplus food, and they distribute that surplus food to homeless shelters. And I think she is based in, I think it's Pittsburgh in the US. It's something that she's now rolling out into different cities. And so and what's amazing about her model is that all the drivers are volunteers. And I think she's got something like 3,000 volunteer drivers. And she was telling us that the what's it called? The approval rate on Uber is something like 90%. The approval rate on her app is about 98%. And that's using volunteer drivers. So that for me is such a beautiful example of a solution to a big problem. The other staggering statistic that she gave, which I think is what drove her to start this organization, is that apparently 40% of all of America's food lands up on the dump. So her quote is, "We feed our dumpsters better than we feed our people." And that's just like a shocking thing, but it's an incredible solution to a problem. So for me, I think mobile technology, and if you think about in almost every single country in the world, everybody has a mobile phone. You think about like in Kenya with the M-Pesa that came out, so you can transfer money on the phone. I do think it's the way to go in terms of solutions. If you can use that kind of thing, it wouldn't be the only one, but I think that's one that's a great win. But there are many, many more as well. For me, the things, just now segueing off a little bit here, I think that it's really funny. For a number of years, I was a judge on the Kautia Women's Initiative Awards jury panel for Africa. And it's a business plan competition again for women around the world, and women who are providing great solutions. And the businesses that I loved best in Africa were ones all about water and sanitation and toilets. And one of my favorite ones is in Kenya, and it's called, and it's basically you might already be familiar with it, but it's, I think it's almost, what's the word for it? It's a franchise model where you buy a franchise and you basically have like 2 toilets and a wash basin, and you have someone who's permanently employed there who is, people pay to use the toilets, and they get educated about the importance of hand washing, etc. And then the waste is used for biogas, and it's used for compost. So everything about it works really well. And if you think about the Kibera slums in Nairobi, where you got the idea of the flying toilets, where people are basically, putting their waste in a plastic bag and throwing it over the fence. This kind of solution is amazing. So for me, if I was going into a new kind of business in this space, it probably would be around something like that, where you're providing solutions for people who don't have the resources. But that's just my own very biased kind of focus. So I'm not sure if it answered your question very well, Bear.
No, that was, I mean, everything you're saying is actually really tangible, it's really lovely, and I guess makes it so much more meaningful and valuable. But yeah, I definitely think you touch on the power of, I guess, networks in your first example, and as well as the power of like mobile, sort of like what technology have you seen being useful? Yeah. It's mobile applications. because
I mean, and there's so many. There are mobile apps that where you've got that are tapped into the medical system, where you've got rural clinics who can be reporting outbreaks of Ebola, malaria, whatever it is, and that goes into a central medical system in the capital cities of countries around the world. That kind of stuff is just mind blowing. You know how it can really reduce waste of mass disease, etc. It's just incredible to me.
No, fantastic. Thank you so much for answering my question, and also thank you for the great work that you've been doing.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you, Zoe, and thank you, Bear, for joining us at 3:45 a.m. in the morning in Australia.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive. Thank you.
That's commitment.
We have a second question from Olabode. Olabode, I'm going to unmute you now if you'd like to ask your question for Zoe.
Hi, thank you very much.
Hi.
So,
Hi.
I'm Olabode again. Hi, everyone. So, I run a non-profit here in Nigeria, the Wise Up Initiative. And what we are trying to do is to increase access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information and services for women, girls, and young people in Nigeria. But one of the major challenges we've been having is the fact that we are a small organization. It's something I started December last year. And we've been having challenges accessing opportunities and partners. Most of the partners want to work with bigger organizations. Opportunities are available to bigger settings. And we are just a small organization. It's a volunteer-based organization for myself and some other medical students here in the College of Medicine. And I would want to ask, how can I strategically position the non-profit, that's the Wise Up Initiative, for opportunities? So we could have opportunities, we could have people wanting to partner with us, because it's difficult getting this, it's very difficult getting partners, getting people to work with us, because we are a very small organization. How can I go about this? Thank you very much.
Okay, so did you say that you're medical students now?
Yes, I'm a medical student.
Okay.
I'm in my final year. Medical school.
Okay. So is this something that you've discussed at your university?
Now, this is something that I've been working on for some time. I have one of my lecturers who is very much in support. Though because of the nature of medical school in Nigeria, you tend not to have the support of the college, because they are expected to read only your books and not divert your attention into other things. So the fact that we are doing this, it's a level of passion on my part. I started this based on some of my experiences as a young person growing up and some other things that happened to me. So it's not something that is well acceptable from the hand of my College of Medicine and my lecturers. I only get support from just a single lecturer in the school who does our best to support us in funding, donations, trying to get us people who would help us run some of our projects.
So, because that would be the first place that I would start, maybe. But as you've said, maybe the expectation is that you're focusing on your studies and not your side project. I wonder if there aren't other lecturers or professors who might be able to approach who might be interested in either helping you with this or making introductions for you. And I'm assuming that there are probably other similar non-profits or larger entities where you are. Just remind me, where are you? Are you in a big city, or is it outside of a big city?
Yeah, I'm here in Lagos, Nigeria.
Oh, okay, Lagos. Okay. So are there other organizations like yours that you're perhaps even modeling your project on, that you might be able to approach and partner with in some way, become a collaboration partner?
Yes, there are actually organizations like mine, like the one we run here, who we are actually trying to model some of the things we do with, because they are successful. But these organizations are actually very big. And when I've sent a lot of mails. I've sent over 50 mails. I've sent over 60 mails, and it's so funny. I tend not to get responses. And I believe it's because we are a small organization. I believe probably the level of trust they have in us isn't so much, and maybe because we are students and things like that. But there are organizations, but it's difficult getting them to want to work with us, because I think maybe it's my perception, but I think because we are a very small organization, just got registered with the government, and
yeah. I'm not sure that I have a solution for you. If I was in your shoes, I would probably also try and use some of my contacts. Like if you have a family member or a friend or someone who's connected into one of those organizations who could make a more direct introduction for you, that often works, I think, around the world. It's like, there's credibility if you're introduced by someone that they know into an organization. Another thing might be, I don't know if you would consider this, to maybe try and work with one of those organizations, either as an intern or as something to get a foot in the door there as well, to again establish your credibility and continue your learning journey. But I don't have a sort of like a magic bullet solution for you on this.
Fine. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll try and reach out. Though I have an intention to work with one of the big organizations here in Nigeria immediately after my final exams. I have an intention to go work with them, gather experience,
Great.
and get a level of credibility or credence from their hand. I have that in mind already.
Great.
But thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Abigail Opong, who is a Millennium Fellow class of 2018 and alumni from Ashesi University in Ghana. Abigail says she's working to help women across Africa to get the needed mentors and support that they need. And her project is called African Women Leadership Forum. The problem that she faces seems to be around just the age of, her being a young person and trying to support women who are much older than her. And she says, I find it very difficult to manage and control, and to manage since I'm a young one and one needs to respect the elderly as a tradition in Africa. What advice would you give her about still going to doing her work while still respecting the elderly, or still maintaining that balance from her point of view?
So let me ask, I'm not sure that I understand the objective. So Abigail, are you matching mentors and mentees, or are you talking about your own experience with mentorship? Can you give a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, Abigail, I know she messaged me. She said it's very noisy where she is.
Okay.
Do you want to type in the chat box, or would you like me to unmute you to talk a little bit more about your project? And maybe meanwhile she does that, I can go to the next question and kind of come back to her in the interest of time. There's a question from Roshni. Roshni, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? And please introduce your name, country, and university.
Yeah. Hi, Ms. Zoe. I'm Roshni from Delhi University, India. So I just heard you speaking about water and sanitation project in Africa. And my project in India is also related to water and sanitation conditions related to WASH concept, which is being promoted by UNICEF. So I would like to ask you regarding that only. Could you please elaborate more on what innovations or what things they came up with and how we can improve upon our projects learning from that?
Okay, so the WASH projects that I was involved in was through the Coca-Cola Africa Foundation, and the Africa Foundation is no longer in existence, although they're still doing that work across Africa. And their project is called the RAIN Project, and they partnered with an organization that's based in Washington, D.C. And a lot of it was, a lot of the water projects were around filtration of water, so sort of having filtration systems that were extracting really yucky, muddy, horrible water and going through a very sophisticated process and then selling that water in local markets at sort of pretty competitive prices to get clean water. The one that I loved, the biggest innovation that I saw, and I'm seeing if I can remember much detail about it, it was taking place in Somalia, I think. And they were working with a local community who are nomad farmers in a way, who build what's called birkats, which is spelled B-I-R-K-A-T, and it's basically like an underground swimming pool water storage facility, which was available to both the people and their domestic livestock. That for me was super, super innovative. And I can't remember many details. I know it's one of those things in the back of my mind I want to go back and have another look at. I think other kinds of innovation that I've always loved are things like rainwater catchment, rainwater harvesting off the roofs of buildings, etc. But I've been out of that space for a while, so I'm not really an expert in it. I just get super excited when people are figuring out ways to kind of recycle water or just find ways of making it more accessible. Another cool innovation that I've seen recently is it's almost like a air conditioner where they have machinery which is now extracting liquid out of the air, and you're getting beautifully purified water. But I'm not sure if I can offer sort of much more than that. I kind of feel like I've been out of the space too long to give you any sort of new ideas or new thinking on this.
So which is this place? Somalia, Africa.
Yes, Somalia, East Africa. Yeah. And in fact, if you want to connect with me later, I can look up the information and I can send it to you.
Sure. That would be really helpful.
Or if you just Google, I think probably if you go into Coca-Cola Africa water projects, it might come up as well.
Oh, all right. So is there any way to connect to you, like through your LinkedIn account or maybe?
If you email Noha, she can give you my details, if that's okay with you, Noha.
All right.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Roshni. And in the interest of time as well, I see Abigail has posted and said it's a monthly webinar that she leads where she invites speaker to talk with local women in the community. So I'm not sure that helps. It's so I guess maybe around the question, maybe even just in general, have you ever came through any challenges when it came to working with people who are older or younger than you, or do you know of people who have gone through something?
I can give you a couple of things that I think are really, really important about mentorship. And so in a number of the programs I run, we do have very targeted mentorship where we've got global women executives who are the mentors, and then the mentees are from every sector around the world. And the most important thing is for each mentee to know exactly what she wants to gain from that mentorship opportunity. So if for example, let's say I'm an entrepreneur and I need help thinking through my marketing, my business, and I know exactly who I want to mentor me with that, I would probably approach them to say, here's why I've chosen you. I'd like to ask you to be my mentor. I would love to connect with you maybe 3 times over the next 3 months for a maximum of an hour. And here's what I want to learn in that time. So it's very clear what the goal is of that mentorship relationship. Because if it's just, I want to hang out with these cool, women who are a bit older than me and learn whatever, they're all busy. They need to know how they can help you. And the more specific you can be, the more they can help you and move you along that journey. And then to also understand when it's done, when you've got the answers and you can release them so that they can work with other people. So I think that would be the first key thing, is like making sure there's clarity around what is the objective of that relationship and respecting that person's time. Oh, and the other thing is also, if they're giving you advice that you don't like, don't reject the advice, and promise me you will never say, yes, but I've always done it like this. That's the worst thing you could possibly do. If you don't agree, say, thank you very much. I'd love to think about this for a while. And chances are, like in a week's time, you're going to think, you know what? Maybe they were right. but never reject the advice. Receive it with grace, even if you don't agree with it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. So in the interest of time, I just want to thank you so much, Zoe, for coming on and hopping on this webinar. I know there are a few other questions that we couldn't get to today. So is there a main way that fellows can keep in touch with you?
Sure. If you want to share my information, I'm not very good at email because my email inbox is crazy full. I would be happy to do sort of like 10 or 15 minute Skype calls, whatever, to answer any questions. That's probably the best way to do things, or on WhatsApp or something. But thank you so much. It's been great. I love seeing your faces on the screen and knowing that you're from around the world. And thank you. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you, Sam and Noha. And let me wish you all a beautiful rest of the day, night, afternoon, wherever you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you on. And thank you to all of the fellows that joined today as well, and at different time zones, obviously. So I really appreciate you all for coming on today. And Zoe, what an amazing, valuable advice that I'm sure people are leaving with today. So thank you for being here.
Sure. And just to suggest, I just had a thought, if there are a bunch of questions, I'd also be happy to do another Zoom call. If we had like 10 questions, to literally go through them in one call. Be happy to discuss that if it's something that you think might work.
Yeah, I will follow up. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yeah, I think that was awesome.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.